Great. Welcome to OPA Live. This is a wonderful team of astrologers who are going to present different perspectives on the year 2018. So this promises to be a very intense and exciting year at the same time, with so many planets changing signs, so many new cycles. And we thought at OPA that it would be really interesting not only to explore what's coming, but to also experience that from different points of view and see how each astrologer. So I will just mute you, Wendy, because there's some background noise, and we'll reconnect. So I will introduce our speakers, and I will begin with our missing speaker, who is Anne Ortley and cannot attend the session, unfortunately. She has prepared a video that we will send later. I will also add some comments and fill her spot as she as we have a bit of time. But otherwise, it will also allow us to give a little more time to each speaker if you need it. So what is happening in 2018? We all know that Jupiter just moved into Scorpio a month or so ago, and the waves it already created. That's going to be throughout 2018. We're getting ready for Saturn moving into Capricorn, and Chiron will move into Aries, and Uranus will move into Taurus, and the retrograde cycle shifts from fire to earth. A lot is happening. So we have here wonderful astrologers from OPA who will hopefully enlighten us. I want to also bring to your attention that there is a previous session for OPA Live. We did another one in September ahead of Jupiter in Scorpio, and we had a panel of 6 astrologers who spoke specifically about Jupiter in Scorpio and Saturn in Capricorn. So the recording for that session is available. And once again, it's free for OPA members. It's $25 for non-members. And we certainly encourage non-members to join OPA. I mean, it's a wonderful deal to have these sessions. It's going to happen quarterly. So 4 times a year, you already cover your membership subscription, and you get so much more. So I'm just going to take the questions now quickly, and I'll see if there's anything pertinent. So the recordings will be sent to those who have subscribed and to the membership. We will upload it to the OPA channel on a secret link, and you'll be able to review what's being said, because even if you're live, sometimes it's just hard to get everything. Yes, it will be sent to everyone who has subscribed and paid, and to the members. So no worries, you're covered. But those who paid for this session and would like to have the first session, we'll send you the link. This one will not be free for non-members. I will introduce our speakers, those who are present. We're going to start with Wendy Stacey from the United Kingdom, who will speak about Saturn in Capricorn and has written a wonderful article for the upcoming OPA magazine, The Queer Astrologer. So hi, Wendy. Then we are going to sequence in with Rick Levine, who will speak about Jupiter in Scorpio. And as we
Hi,
know,
guys.
Jupiter in Scorpio is already trotting on that very precarious territory and has already created a lot of drama, as Scorpio like to do. So we look forward to that piece. And then we're going to follow with Gemini the Scorpio, who will speak about the Mercury cycles. And as it is with Gemini, you get a lot more than what is listed. So I'm sure we'll have many more insights and a lot of material to chew on. And we're going to close with Uranus and the Aquarian Norwegian astrologer Sol Johansson, who will speak from her own Aquarian download about the planet Uranus and its ingress into Taurus next May. So it's the last one to shift sign. And as we may know, Uranus was in Taurus 84 years ago, just ahead of World War II, when there was a lot of economic changes. So hopefully we'll be a little smarter this time, and we look forward to that as well. So without wasting any more time, I just want to add one more thing, another cycle that I will be touching on, since Anne is not here, is going to be the Mars retrograde cycle. Mars will retrograde in Aquarius and a little bit of Capricorn during the summer of 2018. And that's particularly important because it's going to be on the eclipses, and it's going to also be the dispositor of Chiron. So that will complete the picture. And do not forget, you will get the recording, hopefully Mercury retrograde willing, from Anne Ortley about the Pluto in Capricorn, third decan in Virgo. Wendy, are you ready? I will stop sharing.
I am.
And give you the screen.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just get this up and running. Can you just see the front slide there? Is that okay?
I can see it.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Maurice. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be doing this. Saturn in Capricorn, rectifying the political turmoil. So, what is it? It's 10 days away, or 9 days away, we have Saturn ingressing into its own sign of Capricorn. And this particular cycle is quite interesting because it's different than many other Saturn's ingress for a long time. This is the introduction to the talk. I've got 15 minutes, I believe, so I'll be quite quick. It's going to be quite different because we're building to two really major cycles with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, which is going to be in January 2020, and the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in December 2020. So this makes this Saturn ingress quite different, and I'll talk about that as I go along. So 19th of December, we see Saturn moving into Capricorn. And what makes this quite different as well is the entire residency of Saturn in Capricorn. Pluto will be there as well. Now, we haven't had this for 500 years, to have these two planets the entire time that Saturn is in Capricorn. So the last time we had this was in 1517 to 1520, and there was a lot of things going on during that time.
Just a quick note, Wendy.
Yeah.
You share your screen. It's probably a desktop sharing. We don't see the slide on the whole screen. It's just a small corner. I wonder.
Oh, really?
if do you see the whole screen on your side?
I see the whole screen, and I see the photos down the right-hand column.
Yeah, we see the photos too.
But I have the whole.
So if you go to share screen, you can select what to share. I mean, it's fine, but it's a little smaller.
Oh, I see.
Select what you would like to share.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, great. I must have chosen the wrong one. Okay, so this is quite interesting that Pluto is there during the whole time. So this is going to shadow, if you like, and certainly influence all that Saturn and Capricorn is going to bring. And it's going to influence the issues that Saturn and Capricorn will raise, and certainly the outcomes as well. And going back to that 1517 to 1520 era is quite interesting. In particular, during that time, in 1517, is when Martin Luther published his 95 Theses. And what it did is it challenged the status quo, which is what Saturn and Capricorn is very much about, the status quo, trying to correct things, keeping things in order, regulating, monitoring. And so when we look back to Martin Luther 500 years ago, what he did is he challenged the governing body at the time. Also to note that at the time, Saturn was also trine to Uranus, as it will be, or very close to be. It won't be actually exact. So there is that same characteristic signature there with the Saturn, Pluto and Capricorn trine to Uranus and Taurus. So what he did is he challenged the status quo, and he brought the Reformation, which completely changed the way people were governed in Europe by the Catholic Church at the time, which were the police, the government, and everything like that. So we're about to enter the same sort of era that we had back in that time. There's a lot of other things that happened during that period as well. It was one of the coldest periods in that century. There was a lot of crops, all the agriculture, things like that. Because of the low temperatures, there was a lot of famine. And of course, Saturn and Pluto in Capricorn is about deprivation, and also about anxiety and fear and things like that. So we may see the characteristics of that with this ingress. I don't think it will necessarily be the same, but the fear and anxiety will still exist as Saturn and Capricorn raises anxiety levels. Interesting during this period as well, you may want to Google this afterwards, but there was a dancing disease. It's quite a funny illness, actually, where people died of dancing. I know it sounds rather ludicrous, but basically what happened is in quite a few places in Europe, people started involuntarily dancing. And they died. Oh, it's very strange, I know, but they died of. They basically started due to anxiety and fear in this period. But also part of the cure was to continue dancing. So people died of dehydration, and it wasn't just an isolated case. This was in Germany, but there was other pockets in Europe that suffered the same thing. And only in the last century sort of have we realized that this was due to a very high level of anxiety during that period. And I think that's quite interesting when you've got Saturn and Pluto as well in Capricorn. And also, and because this particular ingress as well is about the Saturn, building up to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in December 2020. This is, so the anxiety is really heightening as well. Remembering that Saturn-Pluto, when they were opposite, we had 9/11. well, you had 9/11 in the States, and that was on the exact Saturn-Pluto opposition. I don't think it's going to be anything like that, and I'm not about doom and gloom in mundane astrology either, but the tensions, it's important to know that people are driven by fear during this period. So it's wise to try and see it in that context, because there will be a lot of perhaps propaganda, particularly with Neptune and Pisces as well, that we can. Yeah.
A quick question.
Yeah.
What do you think the fear and the anxiety comes from? I mean, aside from the fact that Saturn in Capricorn can be intense, but what would be the source so we can?
Well, yes. Well, I'm gonna flip to that. Give me 2 seconds, because I can flip to that now if you like. The key. Oh, let me just. The key. Oh, can you see that with the photos?
Yes.
Or is that? Oh, okay. So one of the key issues, I think, with fear and anxiety is because Saturn has just come from Sagittarius. We are going to. It's about putting up walls and fences against foreign threat. So the anxiety about foreign threat, now we have this all over the world at the moment. It's not just about Trump building a wall to keep Mexicans out. It's about the border controls the US have brought. We have Brexit here in the UK, and it's a very, trying to keep foreigners out. There was a law passed in New Zealand last week about foreigners no longer being able to buy property in New Zealand. There's, and it's happening, the refugee stance on many countries around the world no longer taking refugees, like Australia, places like that. And this was sort of very much about the Saturn-Neptune square that we had from September 2015, 16 I should say, when it was testing people's humanity. Saturn and Sagittarius square to Neptune and Pisces. It's about people's humaneness. And the refugees crisis from Syria brought this to our attention. And with the Saturn now going into Capricorn, anxiety is going to be raised, and it is coming from the Sagittarius. It's going to be about foreigners, threat of foreigners. It's going to be about reining in the economy, where things have been inflated in certain areas, certainly not in every area. So the fear is going to be about our own safety, our own national safety, our own personal safety. And another example of the anxiety as well is, with Saturn and Capricorn, there's a new set of rules that need to be brought in. And pretty much I think this is because we haven't had Saturn in Capricorn since we've had globalization. So I think there's a desperate need to seal our borders, find our feet in this world where we are now global. We have technology that we certainly didn't have 30 years ago. So it's quite a different, it's going to bring new regulations, new laws, new policing. And another example is like, parents don't know how to monitor their children on the internet. These are all new to everybody around the world. So there's going to be Big Brother is going to security, CCTV, all that sort of thing that Pluto and Capricorn brought is going to come with a new set of rules, with Saturn coming to join it. And so it's about safeguarding, and border controls and things like that all around the world. It's not just the US gets a lot of media attention on it, but it's actually everywhere. It's everywhere in every country. I mean, we've got something like 600,000 refugees in Bangladesh that have been thrown out from ethnic cleansing. Again, this is a Sagittarius issue. This is about foreign threat, a religious threat. It's about, you know, and even like what Trump, when, you know, last, well, I think it was on Friday, when he declared Jerusalem being the capital of Israel. This is playing with the Saturn going from Sagittarius to Capricorn, creating new rules, new walls, new fences between people, and it comes down to foreigners and religion. Which is what we saw with the Saturn-Pluto opposition in 2011.
So there's a question.
Sorry, I'm rattling away here.
Someone asked, I thought Pluto demands of us that we give up our preconceived notion and construct, but not in Capricorn?
I think if we do that, we only do it in hindsight. You know, we can only see that that's been done in hindsight. I mean, Pluto and Saturn in Capricorn is interested in overthrowing the status quo. We need to get rid of all the dead, rotten wood. We need to get rid of the corruption. We need to get rid of we need to get rid of all of this in order to build a new regulatory body, if you like, which will, of course, be one and the same as. That's how it works, really. Sorry.
So, my question is, when you say there's a need to restore order, and you speak of borders, are these? Do you envision just the current system becoming more domineering and maybe oppressing, or do you see rectifying, correcting abuse, bringing better leadership?
I think one will have to. I think it will have to probably get worse before it becomes great. It has to go into the dark before it sees the light. Or I think there'll be a lot of fear in terms of. I mean, in the same way that Martin Luther 500 years ago was imprisoned, really, you know. For his desire to overthrow the governing body, and this is going to happen again. And you know, you already see almost every government around the world is unstable at the moment. Mm-hmm. People are divided. There is a divide on around the world by people trying to hold on to that national identity. I think that is. And I think that's going to become a lot worse and a lot heavier and a heightened anxiety before it gets better.
So what is better? What do you see as the goal for all this? What's the...
Well, I do think... I think what we need to do is lots of things. I think we need to... take stock of where we're at in terms of a globalized society. Only by putting up walls do we realize they need to come down, if you like, in some form or another. We need to invest in the careers of the generation that's going to be managing this. And it's interesting, the generation born between 1988 and 1993 have either two planets of either Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune in Capricorn. So this is going to transit all those planets for them. So they're the managers of this, and they're the ones who are going to have to install a new system. We need a new system in order to cater for the new world we live in, and the new world that's going to come, particularly with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020, which I do want to say is, the first conjunction in air that we've had for 700 years. So and we're in for a very fast and sort of irreversible change as we sort of move into this era. And I know I'm really running out of time here, aren't I?
Yeah,
so I'm just gonna. I mean, I just want to just say perhaps a couple of things. It's not all doom and gloom, of course. There are massive, wonderful innovations in architecture during this period. There's massive investment in production and manufacturing, which is Capricorn's domain. The first book of dentistry came out while Pluto was in Capricorn, and with Saturn there, we're going to see innovations and things like that, skin and bones medicine, science and that sort of thing. But I did want to mention just two things. I'm just putting these because of the recording, really. People can look at it later. Importantly, that Saturn is going to be opposing the stellium that the US have. I'm using the Sibley chart here of Venus, Jupiter, Sun in Cancer. So the dates are here on this, so you can go back and look at this. So I think these dates are very important for the United States, looking at that stellium, Venus, Jupiter, and Sun being opposed by Saturn. It's good, and Pluto, of course. So, which has already passed.
What do you envision could happen during the Saturn opposing Sun, given that it will also square the natal Saturn of the United States?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Well, it's about wars, isn't it, and border control, things like that. But I think it's also, on a more positive note, I think it's also about creating new types of business. That's what Saturn is great at doing. For you with the stellium and Cancer in the 7th house, it's about new ways of creating family. Or there's going to be an opposition to this. I mean, you can already feel it now. I mean, all these issues.
Do you think it means that the leader will mature and grow up with Saturn?
No, not at all. No. Well, I mean, Donald Trump's going to have his Mercury, Saturn, and Venus, of course, opposed as well by these particular by the Saturn transits, and in particular when Saturn conjuncts Mars in April next year, end of March, April. I've got my dates here. It's on the previous slide. It will oppose Donald Trump's Mercury as well. I mean, we've seen a lot of things he's been transited with, and he seems to have escaped them. But it's going to be an interesting period. I think that. March, April next year when that happens.
So I would just want to recap and summarize some of your points. And the one thing that really I really internalized was that we come from these strong periods of many planets in fire, Sagittarius and the nodes in Leo and Uranus in Aries and Saturn in Sagittarius, and so there was this sense of expansion and excesses, and all these refugees crossing borders, and now with Saturn in Capricorn, there's a need to reorganize and to basically regulate, which can go to the other extreme of shrinking things too much before we find the right balance.
There'll be squeezing. There'll be new rule. Children will be. I mean, as an example, there'll be time slots for children on the internet. There'll be new firewalls invented to stop people accessing things, and all this sort of. There is going to be a squeeze because we sort of haven't quite got control of the globalization we live in, and this is the first time Saturn's been in Capricorn since human beings have lived like this. So it's going to be interesting in terms of politics. I think it's interesting when Jupiter Saturn conjunct at 0 degrees in Aquarius in December 2020. That will also for you in the States, it's an election year, and you have Michelle Obama that has an unexpected Mars-Saturn conjunction, and which conjuncts that Jupiter-Saturn, which I think is going to be very interesting for the States politically. And I think she will be brought in to the 2020 election for the United States.
Interesting.
She unexpected Sun Mars. Her Sun is at the end of Capricorn at 28, I think, and Mars is at 3, but they're an unexpected duet. But the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction picks that up. And I think she, for example, is a role model that people feel safe or feel a different type of feel safe with someone like her, as an example.
Thank you. A last note on how this affects us personally. What advice can you give as a closing statement to people in personal life?
Invest in your old age. I mean, pensions are a problem. You know, we live in an aging society, and the politic and the economy right now are not catering for an aging society. I think it's if I was to give any advice, I would say check out your pension to see if it's really, really going to be there when you're older, and buy land somewhere that hasn't been,
something tangible.
Definitely something tangible, yeah. But that's going to change again with the Jupiter-Saturn and air that's coming in. So I think there's going to be a real desperate need to sort of get into the whole manufacturing of things, which I don't think will last, because we're moving into this more service and air era where manufacturing.
2020.
Yeah. So this is like a desperate journey, I think, that Saturn goes through Capricorn, and there's it's sort of trying to slow things down. That's what I think it's going to try and do.
Well, that's not a bad thing, to slow things down, because they're a little too fast.
Yeah, well, I think they're going to get even faster. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And
thank you.
As we know, you will, you can review this through the recording, and Wendy has also submitted an article for the Career Astrologer. So some of these points will be also elaborated upon. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Enjoy the snow in Britain. And as I transition to Rick, I just want to remind everyone that the last time Saturn was in Capricorn and Jupiter was in Scorpio was in 1959. So we have a return of Saturn and Jupiter from 1959. So those born that year and events that occurred in 1959 may also possibly be reactivated. So thank you, Rick. Mike, to you. You're muted.
I'm unmuted. Well, greetings all. Thank you for the warm-up act, Stacey. Lovely to see you. Lovely to see all of you here, actually. What a wonderful thing this is. And a particular thank you to Maurice and OPA, and Maurice for all the fantastic work he's done with OPA, really exploring the paradigms available to us from digital technology. I commend you, Maurice, and thank you for involving me in this. Okay, I think I have a lot of material to cover, so I'm going to just stop blabbing and thanking people and jumping in, and I'm going to hit my screen sharing, and I'm going to share my whole desktop. No, I think I can share a PowerPoint slideshow. That'll be work there, I think. And do you guys have this? Let's see if I can. Now it won't let me.
We see the OPA Live banner.
That's what you should see. Except now it's not letting me advance slides. Oh, maybe this will.
Press enter.
That's not doing anything. Hold on a second. Maybe I'll go back to press the whole screen. There is a PowerPoint here. Stop share. Can I stop share?
Yeah.
And then hello again. And now screen share. And let's try desktop and see if that works. And why isn't this doing this? Okay, here we go, I guess. So, Jupiter and Scorpio. Can you all, do you see that screen now? Are we good? Okay.
Yeah.
So, and let me start my timer so I know when my 15 minutes is up
Well,
or so.
you have 17 to 18 minutes because Anne is
Okay, I have a lot of material to cover, and so away I go. All right, so as we know, Jupiter entered Scorpio. It will be in Scorpio for most of the year until early November, November 10th, I think, or 8th. I have the date here in a moment. And so Jupiter in Scorpio is really going to be a defining aspect of the year ahead. And so I want to start off and just kind of go back to basics, because in astrology, sometimes we jump to conclusions before we actually have our information together. And so, you know, most of us who do astrology know that Jupiter is considered to be the greater benefic, whereas Venus is the lesser benefic. I'd like to point out that there may be some sexism here involved in the greater and less than, which may be being rectified a bit. And as we know in astrology, by just looking at Pluto, size doesn't matter. Plato wrote, "Excess generally causes reaction and produces a change in the opposite direction, whether it be in the seasons or in individuals or in governments." This is a key thing to understanding how Jupiter works, because we tend to think of Jupiter as the greater benefic as being the good planet, and it ain't necessarily true. Now, Jupiter is the king of gods. He was the king of all the gods on Mount Olympus. Jupiter is Optimus Maximus, good Jupiterian words. It's as good and big, maximum goodness, all good, all powerful. And I like to think of Jupiter, sometimes language is very important. We'll talk a little more about this in a minute. But the fact of the matter is that Jupiter is really Father Sky. Now, I know Uranus is really the sky god, but it's Jupiter, Zeus Pater, Father Sky. Along the way here, this actually could be an entire talk unto itself. And that is, Jupiter is, because of its expansive nature, it is related to the idea of hope, of making something better. And my Buddhist friends always point out to me that hope isn't as good as it sounds, because hope takes us out of the present moment and puts us into the future where we hope things will be better. Now, I'm not saying that hope is never valid. I'm just saying we have to be careful of having that Jupiter represent hopefulness that things will get better in the future. Things get better in the future only by doing something in the present. So Jupiter, some of the keywords: growth, expansion, opportunity, bounty, joy. These are all pretty good words. Travel, because that's expansive. Good fortune, good luck, excess, religion, philosophy, beliefs. Now, most of these things have to do with, in effect, with somehow getting bigger. Jupiter is, in fact, the largest of all the planets, and it is expansive. And wherever Jupiter is in a chart or by transit, it works as a magnifying lens that makes things bigger, better, and more. Unfortunately, bigger, better, and more goes to too much. Now, linguistically, there's an interesting thing here, and that is that Jupiter actually is the sound of the f, g, j, and p linguistically. Now, this isn't 100%, but when you start getting into the feeling of language and how it relates to planets, something I've spent a lot of time in, it's very fascinating, because Jupiter becomes, let me just quickly go here to, I don't know if I can back up now. Yeah, that Jupiter basically sounds like jolly, big, favorite, gas. Jupiter is gaseous, and the gas builds until something pops. And Jupiter, all these sounds that have the sound of happy, bounty, balloon, all these things are gas, that's gas escaping. And you compare that with Saturn sounds, and you get the ST sounds, which are very different: the structure, the status, the stability, the constriction, the test, the austerity. So this whole linguistic thing is very fascinating, and a topic that I love talking about, but don't have time to more than now. So Jupiter's role in the solar system is very interesting, because in some ways it's it catches all the excess stuff, and it protects Earth, because its gravitational field is so big that it pulls in comets and space dust and things that might be heading in toward the sun. And Jupiter is kind of like a big vacuum cleaner in a way, and as such it continues to grow and grow and grow. Jupiter is expansive. It's the only planet in the solar system that gives out more energy than it takes in. All the planets are reflective. Jupiter is also projective, and it actually gives off light unto itself. The light is in the X-ray radio end of the spectrum, but it is electromagnetically broadcasting rather than just reflecting. So we have Jupiter's ingress into Scorpio that occurred on October 10th, 2017. Whoops, there we go. And Jupiter stays in Scorpio until November 8th, 2018. And as Wendy so aptly discussed, for most of this time and for all of 2018, Saturn is in Capricorn, and we'll come back to that in a moment to make a point as to why this is so important for a discussion of Jupiter, to know that Saturn is in Capricorn. So Jupiter in Scorpio brings hidden things into the open, and in Scorpio, some of those things that may be brought into the open have to do with sex and power, with financial relationships. Remember, the Scorpio as the 8th house has to do with the complexity of interrelationships, as opposed to Taurus, which is the simplicity of what's mine. And so we find here that the Jupiter in Scorpio is acting as a magnifying lens, bringing these things out into the open. And of course, as Maurice alluded to, but didn't say specifically, our opening volley for Jupiter in Scorpio within days was the Harvey Weinstein. And I say et al. Because this list continues to grow. It's growing. It will continue to grow and grow and grow. And I am reminded by my editor, Gail, that Jupiter's visit to Scorpio is not about any one event. It's a journey, and we're barely, we're nearly 1/10 of the way through this journey. But to think that we know where this is going right now would be a bit foolhardy. However, I do want to focus here just on a moment on a very important twist to this, because after the Harvey Weinstein things came out into the open, there was on 10/16, on October 16, the New York Times ran a piece that quoted Woody Allen, not really defending Harvey Weinstein, but basically saying that he was a good guy and he feels very sad for him. And he made this statement: you also don't want it, meaning the Harvey Weinstein, what's the right word, the social punishing of Harvey Weinstein. You also don't want it to lead to a witch hunt atmosphere. And I think here he stirred up more than he intended to, because in fact, the following day, there was an article. This is available on the web, both of these articles, both the Woody Allen and the Lindy West article that was published the following day in response to Woody Allen. She wrote, "Yes, this is a witch hunt. I am a witch, and I'm hunting for you." Now, here we have a very important thing about where Jupiter Scorpio is coming from and where it's going to. And we have to, I don't know whether this is on my next slide or not. Yeah. We need to just stop here for a few moments to understand what witch hunt is. I mean, this is something that the blonde idiot in the White House has alluded to a number of times, and he's used the word witch hunt, you know, to basically describe something that was kind of over the edge and, you know, and kind of trying to ferret out something that may not really be there. But the fact of the matter is that until the mid-16th century, the word witch was not feminized. It was a gender non-specific word that really meant a wise person. And somehow, all in one sweep, it became associated not only with the feminine, but also became a bad thing. In fact, a word that's often used to describe an older witch is a hag. And so here we have this whole thing about the devaluing of the feminine. And in fact, one of the greatest witch hunts that we in the United States often think of, the Salem witch hunts, we don't understand that the Inquisition, this is the Catholic Church's Inquisition, as it came through towns in southern Germany in the mid 1500s and on into the early 1600s, there were hundreds of thousands, this is very well documented, women who were killed as part of the Inquisition because they were witches. In fact, there were towns in Germany where there were no living women left after the Inquisition came through. Now, this is kind of crazy, and it puts a whole different lean on the fear that the patriarchy has of the power of wise women. And I think that this move of Jupiter into Scorpio is not just about the sexual power abuse that's coming out into the open through the long list of people, which, as I said, will continue to grow longer. But it's really about other inequities too. And the Black Lives Matter and the whole, I'm calling it gender issues matter, I think are tied up with this Jupiter into Scorpio very completely. William Shakespeare wrote, "Can one desire too much of a good thing?" Mae West said, "Too much of a good thing can be wonderful." Mae West also said, "If a little is great and a lot is better, then way too much is just about right." However, that's not really true. I mean, just look at all the people that in this country, in this world, that are dying of cancer. Cancer is a disease of Jupiter. It's a cell that is out of control, and it's growing. And it's growing without any constraints. So the question is, what stops the gas giant from growing indefinitely? What opposes, and I don't mean an astrological opposition, I mean an energetic opposition. What opposes Jupiter? It's Saturn. That's Saturn's job. Saturn's job is to constrain, restrain, and contain Jupiter. Saturn, as we know, is the gatekeeper. Saturn's job is to oppose Jupiter. And in fact, astrologically, we look at Jupiter and Saturn as the cosmic regulators. And herein lies part of the key to understanding how next year will play out with Jupiter and Saturn working together to regulate growth and sustain life. Because Jupiter and Saturn together have to do with expansion and contraction. They have to do with reward versus the hard work that you put in to get the reward. They have to do with optimism and either pessimism or realism. They have to do with happy and sad. They have to do with good news, bad news. They have to do with even physical and metaphysical. And herein there's an interesting thing about Jupiter and its relationship to the metaphysical that is still bound or contained by Saturn, the physical. And that is that until Neptune was discovered, Jupiter did double duty. And so somehow we moderners have taken a lot of Jupiter's metaphysicality away from it as we gave it to Neptune. One of the key words to understanding the Jupiter-Saturn, what's the right word, cooperation is peristalsis. Interestingly, it has the P sound of Jupiter and the St sound of Saturn. And peristalsis is the biological process that we use to move things through our digestive system. It's a successive wave of expansion and contraction. You can think of a boa constrictor eating a rat or some animal, and you watch that bulge moving through it. This is peristalsis. And this is the way Jupiter works. It's Jupiter and Saturn are these successive waves of contraction and expansion. We also need to touch base on the fact that while Jupiter is moving through Scorpio, Scorpio's traditional ruling planet is Mars, and Mars now has moved into Scorpio. We're not going to talk about that a whole lot because that won't be there in 2018. That's there now. But when Mars is moving towards Jupiter over the next weeks, we will see more and more of this energy and get flavors of what the journey might be ahead. However, when we look at Pluto as the modern ruler, or the planet that we moderners associate to Jupiter, we begin to see that how important Pluto is in its run through Capricorn, and Pluto, as we know, is halfway through its Capricorn run. So here's the important thing to understand, and that is that Pluto's job is to deconstruct and reconstruct. And while in Capricorn, what it's deconstructing and reconstructing, what Nietzsche called nihilism, is basically the basic structures of the world itself. And so as Jupiter and Pluto are working together, we have Jupiter in Scorpio kind of expanding this hidden stuff, while Pluto is taking down the government structures, the laws of the land, the financial structures. All of this is being deassembled, and we've appointed Donald Trump, I think, as the keeper of this deassembly, this deconstruction, however horrific it might seem. So the fact is that we can see the financial relationships, the sex and power. Oh, and I should mention now, coming back to what Stacey said, that the fact is that with Saturn moving into Capricorn and Saturn and Pluto, Saturn only has one purpose right now in Capricorn, and that's to join up with Pluto the end of beginning of 2021. That is its goal, and we will see these issues come more and more into play as Jupiter, the magnifying lens, really brings that all into focus. One last piece here, and I'll try to make this brief. I know I'm hitting my 18 minutes or just over, but I'll go be real quick now. And that is that Jupiter is also trining Neptune, and the first of 3 trines was on December 2nd, 2017. The retrograde Jupiter trine is on May 25th, 2018, and the direct trine, the third and final, is on August 19th. Now, again, this is something that is impactful all year. And here we have the positive impact of water and how Jupiter and Neptune work together. Remember, Jupiter and Neptune are cosmic buddies anyhow, and in fact, I like to say that Neptune is simply Jupiter unfettered by the restraint of Saturn. In other words, Jupiter is like a balloon that you blow up. You can only blow it up until it reaches the limit of Saturn, and then it stops. Jupiter is the logic because it has to maintain the laws of reason established by Saturn. Once Jupiter escapes from Saturn, it becomes Neptune, and it disperses forever. Jupiter says, go forth and prosper. And in fact, in Sagittarius, it basically says, go forth and go deep and prosper. And I'd like to end with my little one-liner, 2-liners, and that is, it's really great to think about all kinds of cosmic shit out there. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. We, as astrologers, need to think cosmically and act locally. That's my presentation, and I packed a lot into it, and I hope that was okay. I'm stopping my screen sharing.
Just before you...
Yeah, I'm still here.
Before you disappear into the puffs and stuffs...
I ain't doing that.
It's interesting when you speak of, the relationship between Saturn and Jupiter, the expansion and the contraction. When we looked at the movement of Jupiter into Scorpio, and we saw, all these sex scandals being exposed through Jupiter in Scorpio, it seems like Jupiter has its own um, self-regulating mechanism to expose excesses, because Jupiter didn't amplify at the time, the sexual abuse. It exposed the fact that there was too much use of power, and sexual boundaries were violated.
Agreed. And in fact, this is not meant to be an apology for anyone who's ever transgressed anyone's boundary, but the question is, it's like what once was a slippery slope is now a razor's edge. And I think that, that there were things that were kind of acceptable or okay, and as long as you didn't go too far, well, maybe it was that's gone. That's all history. And I think you're right, Maurice. I think that Jupiter does have its own inherent regulatory factor, but I would suggest that it's actually still because it's contained by Saturn. I don't know, just my thinking on it, but it's a good point.
Thank you very much. And, along those lines, I think that being in Scorpio, obviously working through the shadows and revealing truth that are not always convenient, and definitely power issues, which are usually about money or sexuality.
Yeah, no, this is a time for individual, cultural, and global shadow work. We have an opportunity, not just with Jupiter in Scorpio, but also magnified by the fact that Saturn is coming towards Pluto in Capricorn. We have our work to do between now and 2020, 2021, or we will be in deep shit, and that's a good Plutonic word.
So, like I was asking Wendy, I wonder if you have a word of advice for personal use of
Yes.
that Jupiter in Scorpio.
Yes, and that is think locally. In other words, I'm not saying that we shouldn't do our political activism and discussing things that are difficult when we can, as astrologers and as teachers and just as humans, bringing up those things that that are in the depths that need to be brought out into awareness. That's part of our work. However, the other part of our work is to do that work on ourselves, and that's a never-ending process. It doesn't matter how far along any spiritual path one thinks one is. They're not. I mean, there's always more work to do. And as such, I mean, I know personally, I certainly have been digging into stuff that I would like to think was put away years ago, but it just isn't quite like that. And I think the key with Jupiter in Scorpio is that we put out the big destructive fires in California, the global fires and wars, by putting out the wars in ourselves. And so that Jupiter in Scorpio is an invitation, okay, with a loaded gun and a dagger, but it's an invitation for us to clean up our individual relationships and to go to those dark places that may not be comfortable, because when things are brought out into the open, as painful as they seem, they have less power than they did when they were hidden.
Thank you so much, and they agree.
Well, I got a couple of those floating around here who agree by not having moved and sleeping.
Thank you so much, Rick, and we look forward to the recording in your article as well in the career.
And I'll make sure to email you or get you a copy of the PowerPoint in case it doesn't work on the recording.
Perfect. And this helps us move to our next guest, Gemini Brett. Thank you. Who will be sharing with us insight about the shifting cycle of Mercury. You know, we tend not to pay attention to Mercury. We often pay attention to the slower moving planets, the big Uranus shifts and the big Saturn shifts. And yet Mercury regulates the way, you know, we manage our lives, the functions, and right now it's retrograde, and we're all feeling it, not just on a technical level, and you know, having our slides not work properly, but it also has to do with so much internal thinking and the way we process life. So on to you, Gemini. Please enlighten us.
All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm kind of speaking from the shadows here, but I'm speaking about Mercury, and he spends most of his time there in the shadows, under the beams. And I want to speak a bit today about Mercury's visibility and the idea of meta retrogrades and the overmind. The article that I contributed for Career Astrologer was meant to be about Mercury cycles, and a golden eagle landed right in my front of my face when I was writing, and I just followed that thread and found my way to Prometheus. And I really feel it's a beautiful and important story for this time, and that Prometheus's prophecy might come alive if we can remember where we came from and what the point of stealing fire was in the first place. So I will leave that for you to review in the Career Astrologers. It comes out very soon. But we see here Hermes, messenger, coming to speak with Prometheus in this terror, this torture from dancing, right? So added this slide during Wendy's share earlier. I mean, dancing disease, what an amazing thing, right? And as Wendy shared, it was the fear of dancing that was killing people. The anxiety, right? And it made me think of Footloose, right? This film where dancing was against the rules. And so we need loose feet maybe to make it through this time, or maybe even winged boots so we can fly. I want to give some credit to Daniel Jamario, my first astrology teacher of the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, who's brought so much emphasis to the visible sky and to experiencing the synodic cycles of all of the planets, but the cycles of Mercury and Venus and Mars in particular, which help us catch up to the truth that though these planets move much more quickly than the invisibles and the beings in the middle, they bring a lot of energy to us. So as Maurice was saying, Mercury is a rather important character. In fact, I mean, long before Uranus was said to rule astrology, we knew that it was Hermes that brought us this craft. Also, Adam Gainsbourg, who through Daniel's work brought the idea of synodic cycles to Gary Caton. And Gary Caton's recent work is book that was just published, Hermetica Triptycha, the first of 3 books Gary will release about Mercury, is a really incredible journey into these Mercury synodic cycles and what Mercury calls the elemental year, and something that I've come to call the overmind. 'Tis true without lying, certain and most true, that which is above is like that which is below. That's usually where people stop, as above, so below, right? Actually, Hermes in his Emerald Tablets first says the below corresponds to the above, and then the above corresponds to the below, right? I think we forget sometimes we can feel our way into the astrological craft as if we are just subject to the fates of the great guides of the sky. And I think what Hermes tells us again and again is that we are not only audience members of the celestial symphony, but we have instruments in our hand. And so this is about learning to jam. And I'm not sure how much time I want to spend on the Emerald Tablets today, but one of the great gifts that Gary's brought to unlock the Mercury synodic cycle is to show how the dance of Mercury with Earth and Sun and the way that we experience Mercury in his very short evening star, then retrograde morning star appearances actually fits this transmission that was channeled here on Earth, or maybe that Mercury, the messenger, hand delivered. So let's read a little bit of this further. 'Tis true without lying, certain and most true, that which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below. to accomplish the miracles of the one only thing. And as all things have been and arose from the one by the mediation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth is its nurse. The father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force is entire, if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly and with great ingenuity. It ascends from the earth to the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, receiving the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. All right, I'm going to skip to the end where, hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. All right. The three parts of the philosophy, the crescent of soul, the circle of spirit, the cross of matter. Hermes, even by the glyphs that we use in modern astrological times, shows us that he holds these three parts which might correspond also to what Gurdjieff, in accordance with ancient transmissions, called the three centers, or said in Beelzebub's tales that the human is a three-brained being. And modern science now agrees that our brain and the head does not hold a monopoly on experience and communication, that we have three intrinsic nervous systems: the head, the heart, and the gut. Yeah, and I would suggest that elementally this corresponds to air and water and earth. And the idea that Gurdjieff shared is that the three-brain being is so often unaligned, or just extremely rarely aligned. An example I like to share is, imagine driving a car. Your body does that, right? Your heart's playing with the feeling of last night's hot date, and your mind is time traveling to the tasks that remain on the list for the day, or maybe even to contemplate why the heck you have lists anyway. Right? So it's hard to find ways to bring all three of these brains into alignment, but when we do, we access something higher. We access, in a sense, what we might consider fire. But fire, which the alchemist drew way above, I feel is not meant to stay there. And I feel that these many elemental shifts ahead, beginning with Saturn into Capricorn, and actually even before that, Mercury into fire. The square of opposites, kind of Aristotelian temperament quality theory, is a really wonderful way for us to get to know the elements and what they do. Where we see air and earth are opposite, and the same could be said for fire and water, but not if we investigate them through the Pythagorean mysteries, which might not have anything to do with Times Person of the Year, but might have everything to do, right? So this slide found its way in here during Rick's share. And the whole idea is this: when we're playing with these three brains, and if fire in some way is a goal, well, wet wood can't catch. The wood, of course, being the earth. So in a culture that encourages emotional suppression at all costs, how can we ever find this higher flame? Yeah. And so all of the elements actually have their own ways to participate with helping the heart to express so the waters can flow. The air, for example, is a catalyst at the fireplace. I have this experiment of trying to catch soggy wood all the time in Seattle winters. So it's a really fun way actually to play in nature with these elements and see how they engage with one another. So air is this catalyst, breath is the fuel, the consciousness in a way. And the heart, when the heart expresses and the water moves, right, then we can see this earth, this body finding spirit once again. Spirit and flesh are one and the same thing, but we forget that. So if we look through this order of the elements in the zodiac, for example, as Uranus will once again teach us, from Aries fire to Taurus earth, as Saturn will once again teach us from Sagittarius fire to Capricorn earth. There is an essence there of from energy to matter. It's like an incarnation. And typically in that process, we also practice the art of forgetting. Yeah, so an example I love to share is consider creation as taught by volcano. It would appear that spirit, lava, wants to feel. It came here to feel. It's mimicking water, but when it finds its way to the true sea, volatile reaction. The lava becomes earth immediately and releases this steam, this gaseous water, which is like this confused blend of air and water. So part of the practice with the elements and aligning the three to find the fourth so we can become one is purifying, separating the head and the heart, having them do what they do, and then bringing them back together so we have that channel, right? So this expressed heart and this spoken truth of the feelings, not just what we think of them, the emotions, is so imperative at this time. Because as planets, I feel, transition from fire energy to earth matter, it's very likely that they might choose to forget, as we do as human beings when we incarnate. And I feel that the messenger Mercury is going to help us maintain connection to where we've come from. I mean, Saturn's having a homecoming. Is Pisces truly the last sign in the zodiac for Saturn, or is it Sagittarius? So Saturn might not only clean from fire to earth as he comes back home with a Kazemi on solstice, right? It might be like, let's release the last 30 years, or at least suppress the heavier happenings into these places. And when we suppress, we serve the suppressed to control us. So perhaps the greatest art of the heart, and I think Jupiter's very much expanding this now as we see, is learning to control the expressed to serve us. And that, to me, is such a beautiful thing when we look at persons of the year being the silence breakers. Yeah, as Maurice and Rick were speaking about, Jupiter ingresses Scorpio and Me Too begins. But Jupiter, we know, made that border crossing from Libra to Scorpio under the beams of the sun, invisible. And it was at this time when Jupiter came back as morning star, shining brightly, you know, not hiding in any way before the rising sun, and made that grand water trine, right, with Cancer moon and Pisces Neptune, the first of the Jupiter-Neptune trines, as Rick shared, right? We had this visibility come forth that the silence breakers were honored as times persons of the year. One of the runners-up was the winner last year, a man who's been accused by at least 20 women of abuse, right? So obviously there's work to do. But my point most importantly is the art of the heart and true authentic expression is very necessary for these elements to play. Yeah, so in the Pythagorean mysteries, the elements were fit to the Platonic solids. There's only 5 ways to do this with shapes. And Earth was a cube, right? They knew the Earth was flat. Just kidding. The idea there is if you're in the center, which is the first direction, you have east, south, west, and north as the 4 corners, right? This is what we align our zodiac to, the sacred directions, and the above and below center, the 7 directions, right? Well, earth and air, hexahedron, cube, and octahedron pair, 6 sides, 8 points, 8 sides, 6 points. And we might expect, as we see in the square of opposites, for fire and earth to relate in this way, but that was not the case in the Pythagorean transmissions. The water actually is the inverse of and relates to ether, the all, the universe, the great essence element that is made from all of the 4 that we see on earth, or perhaps is the goal of aligning those 4. So water, icosahedron in these transmissions, 12 sides and 20 points, actually 20 faces and 12 points, pairs with the dodecahedron. It's the tetrahedron of fire, 4 sides, 4 faces, 4 points, is the inverse of itself. And the idea there is a higher fire and there is a lower fire. So part of the process is bringing that fire out of the heavens down into the earth, grounding it into the body. So that water can express through warmth, that the air can rise, that we have this alignment. This is why I feel Prometheus stole fire in these great tales, where Saturn, perhaps, who ruled over a golden age, was the body brain, was this experience that we might even call survival. And the one who throws the lightning bolts in the dome, Jupiter, is the brain, right? So part of the awakening that we're going through now, and I think one of the great invitations of these elemental shifts, is to come into the heart, which is not only connected through compassion to everyone and everything, it literally is the magical inverse of the universe itself, according to these Pythagorean transmissions. But the trick is to connect this higher fire and lower fire. So Hermes speaks about it goes to the heavens and comes back again. And as Gary's shown very brilliantly, we can see this with Mercury. Mercury's Cazinis, and thrice great Hermes, Mercury, has 3 synodic cycles every year, beginning in the center of his 3-week retrograde with the interior Cazimi. Mercury's retrograde, as we know, is Mercury is passing between Earth and Sun. So there's that moment, in a sense, where Mercury Cazimi, in the heart of it, in the throne room, is having the wisdom of the last 4-month synodic cycle composted into the mission for the 4 months ahead. Now, he says in the tablets, the sun is its father, the moon its mother, the wind hath carried it in its belly, the earth its nurse. And we speak about this often in astrology as the sun is father and moon is mother. But it would appear, especially when we honor Mercury's meta-retrograde magic, that he's speaking about the elements: sun, fire, moon, water, wind, air, earth. You guessed it, earth. Because Mercury, through this greater retrograde cycle, moves through the elements in order reverse to what we're used to through the primary and secondary motions of the zodiac. Okay, so Mercury, for example, who makes these 3 interior conjunctions to Sun, inferior conjunctions, which means below, close to Earth, makes those in the same element for about a year or 2 years, 4 cycles or 6 cycles typically. The interior Mercury solar conjunctions of 2016 and 2017 alike were all in the Earth signs. And here on December 12th, we have Mercury interior conjunct Sun in the sign of Sagittarius. In 2018, we will have 3 Mercury synodic cycles that begin respectively in Aries, in Leo, in Sagittarius. And then he'll move on to water. And then he'll move on to air, and then earth, and then fire, because in this meta-retrograde, Mercury's moving the elements backwards. So not only are we trying to bring fire down to earth in this explosive energy that can be too hard to keep up with and encourage forgetfulness, but Mercury's actually bringing earth to the fire for a slower burn. So we can cultivate that inner flame of will, why Prometheus stole this fire, so we too can create. And we can ground in, I think, to the gifts and invitations of Saturn Capricorn to create literally a rod for Uranus lightning in Taurus. So these beautiful earth technologies that will merge, I feel, with the old wisdom ways can be a guide for us to cure this strange thing that we've seemed to have caused in the earth game, but I'm sure for divine purpose. So one thing Gary shows, and I know I'm running out, so I'm not going to go too late, but I really encourage you to buy this book, is that Mercury's Cazimi between Earth and Sun aligns in the same degrees of the zodiac as his highest visibility as an evening star just before the retrograde, and his highest visibility as a morning star just after the retrograde. And these are the periods of above visible evening, below invisible under the beams, and above visible morning star, as he's transitioning from the previous synodic cycle of about 4 months to the next. So the beautiful thing in this year, and this idea of elemental years, is that not only is it in a moment like Uranus ingressing Aries moving to Taurus in May, and though Uranus will retrograde back into Aries from Taurus in November, right? Or Chiron dancing across the Aries point from Pisces into Aries and back to Pisces and back to Aries, you know, unfinished business. Still, the elemental shifts are in a moment. How can we really experience and bottle that lightning in the case of Uranus? And yet for Mercury, it's this yearly thing. It's like he's bringing Capricorn to Sag, or sorry, the opposite. He's bringing, yeah, Capricorn to Sagittarius. He's bringing Taurus to Aries. He's bringing Virgo to Leo. And so we have this longer breath, this slower flame, this subtle burn that I believe will help us engage with a bridge between the worlds of the subtle and the gross, the spirit and the matter, right? And the last thing I think I'll share, because of time, is check out the idea of the overmind. And what I mean by that is rewind to the Mercury-Sun conjunction interior. So this means retrograde Mercury conjunct Sun before your birth. And the idea is we can play with that just like we do with a new moon, a prenatal new moon chart, or even a prenatal eclipse chart. In a way, this is where your Mercury was born. And if you feel into that energy of that element, let's say, for example, your Mercury's in Scorpio, but the cycle started with a retrograde conjunction 2 months before in the sign of Virgo, then your Scorpio consciousness, that Mercury essence of the art of the heart, has a Virgo subtle energy, which is one of the gateways to open to higher self. So I hope that makes enough sense to play with. And Maurice, maybe you could interrogate me to make that sound a little more clean. But thank you for taking the journey with me, friends.
Well, thank you so much, Gemini. And indeed, those of you who are interested in sacred astronomy for astrologers, Gemini is starting his new course early January, and it's an online course and you can get recordings. So you're welcome to join, and we will also advertise some of the other panelists' programs. If you have anything to share, we can send your slides as well. The one thing I wanted to just clarify is that you see the beginning of the Mercury cycle with its retrograde conjunction to the Sun, inferior conjunction.
Yeah, so Daniel Jamario at Shamanic Astrology, they begin with the Mercury station direct. Because
back to your table.
What's that?
Can you show your table of dates of the different retrograde?
Yes. Well, so let me just share this first, or we could even, let me share this. Let's look at the chart, right? So here's the coming Kazemi. But the idea there is obviously Mercury can't be seen. He's literally coming between Earth and Sun. And why to start the cycle here is because it's like a new moon. We know this isn't possible, obviously, with Mars and Jupiter and the outer planets, but Venus and Mercury can come between Earth and Sun and literally sit in that place where they, especially in the case of the messenger, is transmitting the energy of the Sun at the time. And then, as like the case with a lunation, it's like the Sun sends Mercury out to go do this thing. But unlike a lunation, because Mercury, unlike the moon, can't get to the other side of Earth, right? We have this pendulum effect. Mercury in the morning, Mercury in the evening. So Shamanic Astrology starts the Mercury cycle with Mercury station direct. All of those will also be in fire signs, right? So we open into the subtle mind when we have fire sign years, like we will with Mercury's cycles ahead. And I used to play that way, but when Gary showed that the maximum visibilities, the maximum elongations from the Sun on either side align to the same place of the zodiac, that's when I was basically sold, and seeing that as this connection with the Emerald Tablets is as above, so below. really has brought me into a way that I play and participate with Mercury retrogrades that is very powerful and ceremonial. Like I go at the time of the evening maximum elongation before the retrograde, and like when Santa comes by, I was taught to bring cookies and a wish list. This is what I do with Mercury. I bring an intention and marry an offering, a sacrifice of like, so a habit, I give you this to make room for your teachings within, right? So I go at this point because these three above, below, above are so aligned.
And that brings another very important time. If we look at this table, we see that the dates of the conjunction with the sun, the inferior conjunction, are now December 12th in a couple of days, then April 1st. It's also important for Europeans to know that these are American dates. So it's December 12th, April 1st, August 8th, and November 27th. And you see the degrees starting 22 fire, 12 fire, 17 fire, and then 6 Sagittarius. After it will move to Pisces, the next retrograde cycle. And so I like your suggestion to bring this, the word shamanic is often, trivialized. But what I think the essence of shamanic astrology is to celebrate these cycles, not just by noticing what's going on in your life, but actually make an offering and connect with nature, do something symbolic that connects you with what's going on. And so these are key dates where we can activate that fire and that Mercury transmission. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just share really quickly, an example, because like say an intention with Mercury retrograding, maybe he's coming across the 10th house cusp in your own nativity, and you're working on visibility in your career perhaps, and say you hate your job, right? And you don't want to quit your job right away. Mercury teaches sacrifice, but maybe you get up at 6 and you start pounding coffee just to make it through the day. Well, for this 6 weeks between evening elongation and morning elongation, bring to Mercury an offering of coffee, meaning you're going to take a fast from the jive juice, and that will allow you to slow down even in the pain of making it through your workday to receive the message married to this intention. Show me how to get out of this thing and into a place where I can give my energy in such a way that fits how I wish to play in the game and make my money, right? So that's the idea of just like marrying an offering to the intention. I speak about that more in my shares. I'll certainly be speaking more about that in my class. And Gary's book is an amazing way to connect to some different techniques to look at this idea of elemental years. So yeah, and thanks for letting me plug my class, Maurice. I feel that one of the gifts of Saturn Capricorn and Uranus Taurus is we're asked to bring our craft down to earth and to get out of the computer some and to be back out under the sky and to work with the living big screen.
Can we bring the computer out?
Sure. Yeah. But people hang out with me and they have their apps going, and I'll be your app tonight. Right?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And
my treat. Thanks for having me.
Another thing to retain, 2 things. Number 1, OPA members have a discount on your course. And so make sure to raise your OPA flag. And the other thing is, as all the planets are moving into Earth, Saturn moves from Sag to Capricorn, and Uranus moves from Aries to Taurus, and Jupiter from air to water. In all these introverted signs, we see that Mercury goes the other way, from Earth to fire, and creates that balance.
And I feel like that bridge, right? Because again, from fire to earth, from energy to matter, which is kind of the way it's meant to be in this incarnational process, from matter to energy, that's like nuclear reaction. But how can we do that in a slow burn? I mean, even in a campfire, you can't get right to that point of the transformation without being fried, right? So I think them going both ways brings this potential bridge so we can literally connect to some of the magic of intentional manifestation this year. And so that practice of visibility and shamanic ceremony, as you were mentioning, Maurice, it just asks us, as we usually preach with Mercury retrograde in general, to slow down, to be in this moment, to experience life, instead of, as we astrologers are often want to do, fast forwarding the clock to the next point that we have to celebrate the greatest freak out of all time about, right?
So you mean we don't need to hold our breath until Mercury is direct again?
And that's the trick with the volcano and the steam, that in the times of great transformation, remember to breathe.
Thank you so much, and all the best. We look forward to your article as well. And this takes us to the next Earth transition, and no less Uranus from Aries, the all excited and neurotic and rebellious Uranus in Aries, moving into maybe a more tamed and maybe also slower moving Taurus. So, Sul, tell us all about it.
Well, that will be the first time we'll see Uranus actually slowing down. It's a principle of great speed, and whatever it touches, it will speed it up. So even Taurus have to get out of the couch now to actually get things done. But it's an exciting time, especially for us in the world of astrology. It's such a massive shift, and it's not one that comes every day. And as you mentioned before, Maurice, I will see if I can find my. Where can I find my thing? Oh, there it was. My little thing. As you mentioned before, Maurice, this was the last time it was in Taurus, was back in the 30s, just the pre-war times. And it was an amazing, terrible time for Europe. It just came out of the 30s, the Great Depressions. They had this series of Pluto-Uranus squares from Aries to Cancer in the beginning of the 30s, and you had this economical instability. You had Germany suffering a lot from First World War problems, having to deal with a lot of debts, and there was Hitler coming to power just as Uranus transited his sun in Taurus. And it led to this terrible war that killed 80 million people and left Europe devastated and in complete poverty. It also led to the Pluto in Leo generation coming swiftly after the Second World War. And we'll see the same shift happening today in the skies. And it's quite amazing, the synchronicities between that time in history and this time in history. Then Pluto was in Cancer, a cardinal sign directly opposite to where it is right now. And Pluto shifted signs just after Uranus was done with Taurus. It will shift sign this time before Uranus is done with Taurus. We will see that Uranus will stay in Taurus from May 15 this year all the way till 2026. And by that time, both Neptune and Pluto will have shifted sign. Pluto will have entered into Aquarius, and we might see then that robotics are taking over majorly a lot of work on planet Earth. We will also have endured and hopefully survived the 2020 conjunctions and this massive jam of planets in Capricorn. So it's a really intense time for Earthlings, mostly due to these heavy planets going into Earth signs, which definitely has to do with, as Gemini touched upon, creating. It is in the material world that we are seeing the consequences of all our actions, emotions, desires, and everything that we have on the inner levels. It is when it comes to the Earth signs that things become visible on Earth. So this has, direct consequences on how we live our lives, how we are sustaining life on Earth, what kind of resources we have available, and how well we can live together in a world that is increasingly facing great problems on a very practical level. Taurus is the first quadrant sign. The first quadrant relates to survival in general. It is about surviving on this earth. And it's thusly related to money, land, territory, agriculture, food, the body, and the bodily needs. Therefore, it's also related to famine and poverty. It is related to something that is very difficult for Earth today, ownership. Ownership and, well, I would also mention inheritance is part of a big problem for the world economy. That people can own so ridiculously big amounts of money or so much land lie in the hands of one individual or one family is very Taurian in a way. So we can expect when Uranus, this higher consciousness, higher octave, the Promethean aspect of Mercury, when Uranus enters into a very slow sign, a sign that sort of symbolizes erosion, a sign that symbolizes this fixed matter. It's Earth. Earth, when Earth moves, it moves very, very slowly. When the crust of the lava has settled, it takes a little power to move it afterwards. And therefore, you know, moving Taurus is not easy. These ingrained territories that we see, if we just take a look at any world map, we will see that these territories are so settled. They are settled into Earth. They are dug in by history. And to change this demands many Uranus transits through the sign of Taurus, I think. Now, we saw what happened to the world map during World War II. Hitler, you know, took Poland like this. He took Denmark. One day it took him to take Denmark. He just completely invaded the territory of other countries. And not that I suggest that this will happen this time around, not at all, but I think we will go through some of the same kind of psychology related to territory, to land, to racial issues that we find also being very darkening to our times, these old racial problems that we have with, I'm thinking back in history, if we go back 1,000 years, we have the little kings on each little mountaintop, and they were fighting the other kings on the other little mountaintop. And this is very Taurian, get off my property, you know. So it is that, you know, we're hoping that Uranus might bring some problems to this solutions to this ancient problem. So Uranus generally is related, due to this high level of insight and consciousness, it's related to revolutions. And revolutions can be good and bad. If they come very abruptly, they can be very devastating to any society. If they come more slowly, they can change and create changes that fuse humanity more with what we have come to know as the human rights. That each individual has the right to live, to have freedom of worry, to have food, and to have a roof over their heads. These are very high ideals that actually we can apply to the more spiritual side of Uranus and of Aquarius. But Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, and whenever he touches anything, there will be this kind of insight that says, this is wrong, this is not good enough, it's not supposed to be like this. So therefore, it spurs revolutions, and it also sets into motion some sort of progress. It might come in a very radical and unforeseen way. We have trouble predicting anything with Uranus, and that's what makes it what it is. But we know that something is being moved forward whenever Uranus is touching any part in any sign. So, yes, Marie?
Just one question.
Yeah.
If during Uranus in Aries, you know, we saw the Arab Spring and people wanting to find themselves, freedom, and you know, we also had the gay movement, gay marriage movement, when it was squaring Pluto. What may create the revolution when it's in Taurus? Would it be food or land? What's the trigger, you think?
Well, the Earth is in trouble. That's the one part that I think is, you know, it's growing increasingly in our consciousness, just as Chiron is in Pisces and Neptune is in Pisces as well. Pisces ruling all these, you know, nature, raw nature. And we see this devastation of our planet. We see that resources are being well, it's flawed. The system is flawed, and how we distribute resources might be a big problem. I'm thinking that some of these problems that we've been predicting for quite a few years now will finally manifest, and we will see that it will be difficult to get a hold of food, even though we're used to having shelves full of food when we go to the stores. Suddenly we might not get coffee, we might not get cocoa. You won't get your coffee now. I mean, and the raw cocoa you drink every morning, it might be super expensive due to slight climate changes. Now, that's not just it. We have another problem. We have money. Now, Taurus is a sign of money, and money rules the world. So when we have these kinds of problems, when the resources are scarce, we are forced to do something. It is very easy to be a revolutionary while we're sitting on our phones and drinking our cafe latte or whatever we are. But when we're hungry, it's definitely easier to be a little bit more angry. And there might be, hunger might not happen everywhere, but famine is a definite, thing for Taurus.
Now, this brings us to the question, Uranus has to do with engineering. And yet it has to do also with new development. If we face famine, this gives all the GMO movement its legitimacy. We need to create more food. There's not enough food. Can we see more food engineering using that excuse, even though we know that ultimately GMO, kills the land?
Definitely. I mean, what will definitely come under scrutiny with Uranus through Taurus is actually farming. Taurus is a sign that rules farming. And now we have all kinds, this is like modern meat industry. And I think one of the big ecological problems, on Earth today is the overconsumption of meat. It's making up a lot of CO2, carbon, and it's the water that we need to produce meat. So this is a very complex situation. I agree with you. There's always this chance that the GMOs will gain more of power during such a bad time, because there's always somebody speculating on catastrophes. And I don't think that it's going to be like worldwide catastrophes, but I think we will see a rising in food prices for sure. And it's going to change a lot of our food habits. And it's going to change how we enjoy life as well, because we've been stuffing ourselves for years now without actually getting any nutrition. So I don't think necessarily GMOs will take over. I think I'm a little optimistic. I think this will take over, like green cities and urban lungs and urban farming. We see this already. It's starting little by little. It's all this ingenuity of Uranus in Aries has brought a lot of these things actually, in action already. But of course, this is a very slow thing to change the world, for instance, into this Venus project vision of Jacques Fresco, which was a Piscean thinker with Venus in Taurus, where every city is organized in a more sharing economy kind of model. It will take probably maybe yet another 200, 300 years. But we also know that every situation that we get ourselves messed up into forces new solutions for humanity. And if that's the pollution of our water, and it is the pollution of the soil, imagine the pollution of the soil. It will bring, of course, hydroponic water systems. We get to figure out how science, Uranus, can help us grow better food that is also healthy and nutritious. Now, we know if nature is supposed to be healthy, there has to be a certain biodiversity. And there's a lot of species going extinct at the time being. Now, remember, Taurus is a sign that is highly subjective. It's an individualistic sign, actually. It's a me sign. So therefore, I think that individual effort, as Rick also mentioned, think locally. No, act locally. That's what you said. And think globally or cosmically or wherever you want. I think this will be a super trend when Uranus goes through Taurus. We will discover again that there's a farmer over there. He sells great honey. I want to buy him instead of going to my supermarket and buy something that traveled half across the earth to end up in my shelves. And this might be something that we come to by our own kind of, thinking, but also because of necessity. Necessity has always been a great trigger for changes.
Mhm.
And I think, I think Uranus in Taurus will be super for all those people who wants to start to farm their own food. There will
Well,
be some, yeah.
in that sense, I think when we reach that balance, it's Uranus is the sky and Taurus is the earth. So it is what Gemini was referring to, that so above, as above, so below, and vice versa, is to marry, the mind with the body. And
Definitely.
then we can have those beautiful gardens. But if there is a disconnect, then what happens is that we may have a hijacking of the earth, a hijacking of the body, trying to manipulate it as the GMOs do.
Yes, and that's also the dark side of science. And I think, this is always something to look after, when Uranus is very strong. And as we can see for this, the Ingress chart for the May 15th, you will see Uranus conjunct Mercury actually, and it's a new moon in Taurus. It's a very potent Ingress chart for Uranus in Taurus with this new moon energy. Everything is in Taurus, and it's a beautiful symbol of natural sciences, of food industry, of basic needs that we need to have covered. People are afraid that they won't have enough to eat, and we know that we need to produce a lot of food for the future. The growth is exploding. We are now 7.6 billion people on Earth, and it will just continue to explode because we love making babies. And there's another thing that is wonderful with this Ingress chart and Ceres, which I actually, I associate with Taurus. Ceres is also conjunct the North Node in Leo for this Ingress chart. She's going to be there actually for the entire time up until then, because she's already in conjunction. So we get a little feel of Mother Nature herself through this Ingress chart. And I think it's a beautiful picture of us perhaps attuning more into our own bodies, listening more into our own bodies. We wouldn't eat all that crap if we really felt into it. What is this doing to me? We would want to choose what actually Taurus chooses, which is more natural food, less processed food. So I don't think we would want the GMOs unless, of course, this dark side of history repeats itself and you have some evil genius that comes and says we have to because it's the only solution. Maybe yes, maybe it is. Maybe science.
Maybe that's going to create, a reaction if you have that force bringing in. I think it may come up during the Uranus in Taurus. But just one thing I wanted to bring up with this ingress, we don't see it here because it happens just a few hours later. But Mars enters 0 Aquarius and squares Uranus at 0 Taurus. So we have again this sky, earth, mind, Mercury conjunct Aquarius, body, repeating.
And it's a very rebellious kind of chart as well. If you look at it, Uranus is squaring the nodal axis for the first time it is in Taurus, which is quite rebellious. And if you look at for instance, the European political, picture at that time, Brexit will have come into effect by that time. The UK is leaving the European Union. That will leave a big hole in the European Union. There's going to be some fluctuations of currencies. We're going to see some changes in people's capacity to spend. There might be a rise in unemployment, etc. Everything that affects our personal economies. So it's not a very stable kind of chart, but it also invites us to use our creativity better on a very personal level, right? And if we fast forward to when it's about to go back again into Aries for a little while, for half a year almost, we see that it makes an exact square to the nodes in Aquarius, which is it's a strong symbol of our creativity taking I would say a grand leap into the future. So what's in store for us right there? And then that's difficult to say, but there's a very strong focus on creative efforts through this. I mean, this is the whole year. It's about autonomy, the combination of earth and fire, about being independent, about knowing your resources, what you can spend, what you have to spend, and all these things that are so important for our feeling of being safe on earth.
So this brings us to the key question. You talk about independence, autonomy, resources. Bitcoin.
Bitcoin. Oh, the cryptocurrencies.
Okay. So, Wendy was mentioning with Saturn in Capricorn that we need, tangible investments and think about retirement. And, Bitcoin is exactly the opposite. It's completely virtual and it has no real backing. It's something that can be quite volatile and subject to a lot of manipulation, and yet it's also a way to gain autonomy from the system and to create independent transactions.
Yeah, well, currencies in general, I think we're going to see some destabilization of currencies in general, at least a little up and down. I mean, the market has always been a little bipolar, but with these cryptocurrencies, which is very Aquarian age kind of currencies, well, I'm a Capricorn ascendant. I'm not convinced yet, but I might be a little slow because I see this. It's a little spacey right now, right? But there's a lot of people, especially younger people. We have to remember now that the Pluto in Scorpio generation is coming in full power soon into the world economy, and also there will be a dip of Pluto in Sagittarius people, and they spend money completely differently. They have completely different ways of using and spending money. They use YouTube instead of pay TV. They sleep on couches. They drink microbrewed beer instead of 10 beers coming from some corporation far, far away. It's a different breed, and these people will come into the economy and into power with a lot of new ideas, and this might be their window. Some of these new voices might finally get their expression now, and we might find that they will be very happy to use Bitcoin. And
that's the point, is that Bitcoin is so volatile. And maybe when Uranus gets into Taurus, it's going to be time to ground it. And then we have, what Wendy was saying, the need to bring boundaries. I mean, they are going to jump on this. The banks are not going to just let this, bypass them so easily. So it seems like there's going to be an attempt to maybe ground this, weirdo currency.
Yeah, well, it's I'm not an expert on Bitcoin, but it's destabilizing. It's undermining the established system, of course, and that's never popular. But that's also progress. Whenever you have a Uranus progress, you also have a Saturnian resistance. That's always happening. And sometimes this resistance, of course, we're going to feel this very strongly. But it's emphasizing the need for new economic models. And right now there's talks about this basic income system that is providing people with money even though they don't have work. And this is very important in the future. There's going to be a high unemployment rate due to a lot of work being robotized. And this is part of what I think we will hear being talked about and brought down to earth in a more grounded way. All these futuristic problems we have related to Taurus, which is about survival. How will we survive the next 100 years? Now it's time for some real solutions and not this fluffy kind of Bitcoin thing, which might be a good trigger to trigger, a movement that changes things, but it's not perhaps offering any viable solutions. What we need now is to figure out how we can live in each little territory healthily and with each other and have enough to eat so that we don't kill each other over again, because we know poor people, if there are a lot of poor people in a society, this is a dangerous society. And that's the really dark side of this ingress or this transit through Taurus. Is perhaps we will find out that the science of keeping people poor is not a very good and smart way to run a planet. It causes too much riots. Yes.
Thank you so much. And very interesting. Of course, a lot of food for thought. And what we retain from this, I think from everyone, is that it's a moment of where it's not just about the fire, where we come up with ideas, and when, you know, Bitcoin basically picked up during Uranus in Aries. So it's a very erratic energy, and we speak of food, we speak of land, we speak of currencies, we speak basically of a need to bring the next revolution in a place that is not just ideological, but it's also practical.
Absolutely, and that's a good idea, I think, because I mean, there's a lot of good ideas on this planet, but you know, action speaks louder than words, and I think that will be like a mantra in the coming years with this very strong focus on earth signs in general.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to your article. And thank you, everyone. I will just close if you can unshare.
Unshare. Stop share. I'm sorry. There we go.
I just want to bring your attention also to Chiron moving. I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Just another food for thought. Chiron will be moving into Aries on April 17-ish, 17, 18, conjunct Mercury as well, always around the sun, as well as the sun will conjunct Uranus and square Pluto, and as the moon will also conjunct Venus. Interesting. This Sun, Uranus, Venus, Moon talk about resources as well. You wanted to say something, Jonassen?
It's the same day Saturn stations retrograde in Capricorn.
There you go. And I remember the last time Chiron moved into Pisces was when we had this big deep horizon disaster that polluted the waters. And so we need to pay attention. This is another, just as with the Mercury cycles, we have now a planet actually moving from water to fire. And then I want to also bring your attention to the fact that in June 25th, 2018, is when Mars will be retrograde. It's going to go retrograde around that date, maybe the 26th, in Aquarius, around the nodal axis. And so Mars will be retrograde the whole summer in Aquarius, where all the lunar and solar eclipse in Leo Aquarius will occur. And if we go actually to the exact moment of this total lunar eclipse, we have here, excuse me, it's 9. Here, we have the lunar eclipse at 4 Leo Aquarius, and then conjunct Mars retrograde, square Uranus in Taurus. And Saturn is semi-sextile the eclipse. So all the planets are in those early degrees. Saturn 3, Mars 3, Moon eclipse 4, nodes 5, Uranus 2, Chiron 2 degrees. It's everything. All that we talked about here is coming, is kind of climaxing and integrating around that time. And it certainly is going to activate the different themes that we've talked about, because eclipses are always portals. So I'm sure we all are going to reflect more on these transits through the year, but mark this date, July 27th. That's this powerful, powerful lunar eclipse, and Mars the whole summer conjunct the nodes. And this also brings another point, the idea that the generation born in 1971 are also born with Mars retrograde in Aquarius on the nodal axis. So very likely the 1971 generation, as well as events that occurred in 1971, may resurface around this time.
Can I just say something there, Maurice? Elon Musk, you know, the guy who's behind Tesla, he's born with that kind of signature. It will be an exciting year for Tesla then, and his project to actually go to Mars, which will also probably be one of these Uranus and Taurus thing. We can grow some fancy vegetables on Mars. That's the next project probably.
So we will bring all this together. If you can share your PowerPoints, we'll share the recordings. And a lot of this will also feature in the Career Astrologer. The magazine is out on December 22nd. We will also, all the speakers, if you have workshops, if you want to share material, if you want to promote one of these events that you're leading, relating to what you've talked about, we'll be happy to also share it with the membership and with everyone. So thank you again. We went over time, but that's always the case when we are having fun. Take good care, everyone. Have a wonderful time. And happy 2018. Woo!